All right, we made it to our last section of chapter 9. In this section, we are going to solve our same quadratic equations we've been doing. Our third method is using something called the quadratic formula. So get excited. This is the quadratic formula. Now, don't be scared. It's not as bad as it looks. We are going to memorize this, and we're going to memorize this with a song. So let's write it down in our notes. We have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If you notice, the formula has a's, b's, and c's, just like our standard form of quadratic equations. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So the next slide has a video with the song. So listen to it, kind of get it stuck in your head, and then you will have no problem memorizing this. Alright, that was the song. Sorry for the refocusing of the iPad camera, but that's the song that's going to help us memorize this quadratic formula. Alright, now we're going to give it a try on a few examples. So solve using the quadratic formula. Here is our quadratic equation. If you notice, it's set equal to 0. That's very important. You want everything all on one side, 0 on the other side. We want to be able to identify the a, the b, and the c values so that we can plug it into the equation. So the equation, if you remember, you can even sing it. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so no laughing, but there it is. So let's plug everything in. X equals a negative, and then we're going to plug in our b, which is a 3. So negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 3 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 5. All over 2 times a, which is 2. All right, so maybe it kind of looks like a little bit of a headache, but we are going to just simplify this and solve. So we're going to rewrite it. X equals that negative 3 is just a negative 3 plus or minus. And now let's work on getting this simplified down to just one number. You've got 3 squared, which is 9. And then here's where some students tend to kind of make mistakes. Should our next sign be a plus or a minus? So what I look at is I look at the next 3 numbers I'm multiplying. It's a negative 4, a positive 2, and a negative 5. So a negative times a negative comes out positive, so plus. 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 5 is 40. And then 9 plus 40 is 49. So we have the square root of 49 all over 2 times 2, which is 4. All right, well, the square root of 49, we know that. Square root of 49 is 7. So how in the world do we simplify something that looks kind of weird like this? Negative 3 plus or minus a 7 divided by 4. What we're going to do is we're going to break it apart. One of these is going to use the positive 7, so you have a negative 3 plus 7 divided by 4, and then the other one is going to use the negative 7, so negative 3 minus 7 divided by 4. Then just simplify the top. Negative 3 plus 7 is 4, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. On the bottom, we have negative 3 minus 7, which is a negative 10. And negative 10 divided by 4 is a negative 5 halves. And we have our two solutions. On a graph, this is where you would be crossing the x-axis at a 1 and at a negative 5 halves, which is the same thing as negative 2.5. All right, so let's try another one. Repetition is what helps us remember this. This one looks a little bit different. If you notice, you don't have everything all on one side. So let's get everything over here where the x squared is. You can subtract 2x to make that happen. Rewrite it so it's in standard form, which means that x squared is first, minus 2x is next, and then your minus 3. That gives us our a, our b, and our c values. So solve using the quadratic formula. So just a heads up, the quadratic formula often is a nice last resort. If you have something that you can't factor and you can't solve using square roots, if you notice this has an x squared and an x, you can't use square roots on that. Quadratic formula is a nice backup. So let's run through that again. Anyone remember the formula yet? I'm going to write it down. Feel free to sing along with me. We have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, not that bad. Well, no, I'm sure the singing was bad, but it's not that bad to actually have to sing it. All right, negative b, so we have a negative, and then our b value is a negative 2, so a negative negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times our a. Well, if there's not a number in front of the x, remember it's like there's a 1 there, and our c is a negative 3. All over 2 times 1. All right, then we just simplify it. We're going to rewrite this x equals, now the negative negative 2 becomes positive. So positive 2 plus or minus. Now we want to figure out the square root, just this piece right here. So a negative 2 squared is a positive 4. Oops. 4. Now let's look at this again. You have a negative 4 times a positive 1 times a negative 3. So a negative times a positive times a negative is positive. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12. And then you even keep going. 4 plus 12 is 16, and you have the square root of that, because remember we do have the square root. The square root of 16 is 4. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. All right, once we've taken the square root of that number, we're ready to break this apart so that we can separate out the positive 4 and the negative 4. So you have 2 plus a 4 all over 2. And now we have to do the negative 4. 2 minus a 4 all over 2. So it's just this plus or minus. We're doing a positive 4 and then a negative 4. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. Divided by 2 is negative 1. So those are our two solutions for x. All right, this one is already set up for the quadratic formula. It's equal to 0. So that quadratic formula again, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We've got our a, our b, our c. So we just plug it in. X equals a negative, b value is a negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is a 1, and times c, which is a negative 4, all over 2 times 1. And then we simplify. Now a negative negative 2 is positive, so 2 plus or minus. Now let's figure out this. Negative 2 squared is 4, and then we have a negative times a positive times a negative. that turns out positive again. That's not going to happen every single time. And then negative 4 times 1 times a negative 4 is a positive 16. 4 plus 16 is 20, so we have the square root of 20. Now, when you see the square root of 20, you might pause for a second and say, hey, wait a second, can't take the square root of 20. So all you have to do is on your calculator, take the square root of 20, and you get 4.47, and it continues. Let's round to the nearest tenth. We're going to use a 4.5 because we're going to do some rounding right there. So that 4.5 goes down here. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. Then we break it apart. 2 plus 4.5 over 2 and 2 minus 4.5. 4.5 over 2. All right, 2 plus the 4.5 is 6.5. Divide it by 2, and you get 3.25. 2 minus 4.5 is a negative 2.5. And then we divide it by 2, and we get a negative 1.25. So if you have a number that you have to use your calculator to take the square root of, just round to the nearest tenth, and then your answers will have some decimals. And that is a decimal right there. And that's your quadratic formula.